Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so glad you've joined me for the last part of our story tonight. And it's an exciting story because the good news is that Patsy, thanks to a private investigator, has located the whereabouts of her fiancé that ditched her at the altar on her wedding day. So she wants to confront him by surprise. And so we're going to find out where this story takes us. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with part 4 of our story tonight. Seb's account. On the day that Patsy Lorenzo walked into my flower shop a few years back, and I saw how obviously artistic she was by the creative way she'd put a very ordinary dress together, turning it into something marvellously special, with her individualistic touches and style, that made me realize she had a special flair. I had been exceedingly frustrated on the day she breezed through my flower shop. I had interviewed other potential florists who had applied for my job, whose portfolios, I'm sorry to say, were rather uninspiring, and their work relatively nondescript. But beyond that they were cheerless people, who would probably be drudgerous to work with, and I don't say that lightly. And I think it's significantly important you choose very carefully the people you work with, in order for your business to flourish. I told myself I'd have to advertise again, until Patsy Lorenzo breezed through my flower shop like a breath of fresh air. She was determined to order her mother a pretty bouquet of mixed-coloured roses for Mother's Day. When I laid eyes on Patsy Lorenzo, I remember thinking, here she is. This is the person I must hire as a florist to work with me, even though at the time she knew nothing about arranging flowers. But I knew that under my skilled wings she'd learn quickly enough, as even if I say so myself, I'm a pretty good teacher. The rest is history, of course. It's funny how in life some people slide into your life so effortlessly, as if they've always belonged. And looking back, it's hard to imagine Patsy never being a part of my life. Over the years I've felt like a brother to Patsy, and become extremely protective over her. When Patsy started to date Andy Glover, well, what can I say? I didn't like him from the word go. The first thing I thought to myself was, what was that sleazebag doing with Patsy? And I didn't like him when he asked me how much money I made running my flower shop. I mean, who asks a perfect stranger you've never met before such a candid question? I just told him that I was doing reasonably well, and left it at that. But I realized that Andy had absolutely no filter. Well, if you're doing reasonably well, you can give Patsy a pay rise, can't you? He said to me with a greedy, almost gluttonous look in his eyes, rather reminding me of a hungry buzzard, eager to pounce on its prey and tear it apart. At that comment, Patsy came to my rescue, looking somewhat flustered and embarrassed, and said, I'll have you know, Andy, Seb pays me extremely well. I get a lot more money than your average florist, so I'm not complaining. Oh, but you can always get much more, can't you? Andy had said. I didn't tell Patsy I didn't like Andy Glover, because she was clearly smitten over him. And it was not for me to throw water on the flames of a blossoming romance. I mean, if someone had done that to me with my relationship with Paul, I wouldn't have appreciated it one bit. I did tell Patsy, of course, to take things very slowly with Andy Glover, as it didn't do any harm to be a little cautious in her relationship with him, but she never listened to me in that regard. I'm afraid to say within days of meeting Andy, she told me he was the man she wanted to marry. And what could I say to that? I know that Patsy's father didn't like Andy at all, as Andy expressed his extreme frustration at me over dinners in a bar one night, that he knew that Mr. Lorenzo didn't like him, and asked me what he thought I should do to make Mr. Lorenzo realize that he was a cool guy. I remember thinking to myself that he was far from cool, but I kept those thoughts to myself, of course. I was telling him that perhaps Mr. Lorenzo was just being protective towards Patsy, as every father believed that no one was ever good enough for their daughter. I remember Andy brightened up significantly after I said that. Thanks, Seb. I don't know why I didn't think of that. But it makes sense what you're saying. You're right. I'm sure Patsy's father would feel that way about any of his daughter's potential suitors, so I shouldn't take his dislike of me personally, should I? I remember feeling validated that Mr. Lorenzo also had his obvious misgivings about Andy Glover, but I kept these thoughts to myself, wondering privately why we both had feelings of unease about the man, as I think Mr. Lorenzo has always been a shrewd judge of character. Mr. Lorenzo is a bank manager who gives loans to entrepreneurs and makes the decisions on whether to lend money on behalf of the bank or not, and sometimes his gut instincts guide him not to lend money to an individual. So the fact that Mr. Lorenzo didn't trust Andy as far as he could throw him was revelatory to me. I knew it must have been agonizing for him to watch his beloved daughter marry someone he distinctly disliked, but what could he do about it? It wasn't for him to dictate who Patsy chose to spend the rest of her life with. I felt much the same. It was none of my business, even though I loved Patsy dearly. I remember the day that Patsy was going to get married to Andy Glover, as if it happened yesterday, with a vivid clarity. She was so happy, radiant she was. I'd never seen her look more magnificently beautiful, when she walked down the aisle like a princess. I was sitting next to my partner Paul at the time, a pew behind Mrs. Lorenzo, as we were considered like family to the Lorenzos. When we watched the proceedings, as the couple were about to say their vows together, Andy stopped short in his tracks and appeared to fiddle around in his pockets. Finally he pulled out his cell phone in the middle of the ceremony to read the text that he had just received. I was absolutely appalled by this unchivalrous behaviour. It was so unorthodox and extremely rude, I couldn't help but think. I mean, who looks at their cell phone while they're about to exchange vows together? There were a few disgruntled, rather disapproving mumbles among the wedding guests, as you can imagine, when Andy did this. After Andy read the text, he suddenly dashed out of the wedding service, saying that he'd be right back. And everybody waited and waited, but he never returned. I was the one that had to chaperone a very bemused Patsy back home. I had to help her pick up the pieces of her broken life and help her mop up her tears. I really wanted to box Andy's ears for hurting Patsy in the way he did. I tried to encourage Patsy to move on with her life, and I believe she did her best in that regard. But 3 years on, she still had no closure. One day over coffee across the road from my flower shop, Patsy revealed to me that she was still struggling to find peace in her life after Andy had abandoned her at the altar. I couldn't for the life of me understand why she wasted any time worrying about that awful man. "I need answers," she told me. "And then I can move on, Seb." That was when I told Patsy about a private detective that I'd heard about called Mr. Froome. I told her if anyone could find the whereabouts of Andy Glover, it was him. And I'm glad to say he delivered on his promises. I was surprised at what Mr. Froome had to tell us, of course I was. Indeed, I was shocked to learn Andy had made his childhood sweetheart pregnant and had cheated on his relationship with Patsy while they were still engaged. Once I learnt he'd married the woman that he had cheated on Patsy with and had a 3-year-old child with the girl and was now living on the Oregon coast in a rather sumptuous home, I felt as if all the pieces to the puzzle were gradually beginning to fit together. I assumed that perhaps on the text message Andy had received on his wedding day, shortly before he was about to say his vows, it might have come from Catherine, declaring that she was pregnant with his baby, and perhaps learning that he was to become a father, he had panicked and as a consequence abandoned his wedding, realizing that if he was to become a father, that he needed to do the right thing by Catherine Carter. All that made perfect sense to me. Well, so I thought at the time. I automatically assumed these revelations from Mr. Froome would help Patsy close that chapter of her life once and for all. But sadly it was not to be. I could see that Patsy had to receive the perfect closure by a confrontation with Andy herself. She needed to make peace with what he'd done to her, and to hear why he did what he did from his own mouth. Patsy didn't want to involve Catherine or her little girl in any of this, so she needed to get Andy on his own. Mr. Froome had told us that Andy Glover's neighbour claimed that Andy went for an early morning run every day as the dawn was breaking, and this, I suggested to Patsy, was her best way of getting him on his own, without having his wife and kid around. I told Patsy if she wanted to go through with this plan of hers, that I needed to be with her to ensure she was perfectly safe. I just didn't trust Andy, or know how he would react when confronted with his ex, who had some tough questions to ask him. I will never forget how Patsy and I left the bed and breakfast we were staying at in the early hours of the morning, when the sky was pitch black. The bed and breakfast was luckily in walking distance from the beach and the promenade, where there were a few vintage shops, an ice cream parlour and a popular diner. It was very cool that morning, so Patsy and I were sensibly clad in joggers and sweaters, as well as sensible running shoes. The houses overlooking this stretch of the beach were spread wide apart and built on a high mountainous incline, so each individual house had its own wrought iron staircase that led directly down to the beach below. Patsy and I took the long walk down the ribbon of beach, and the houses that overlooked it were magnificent. We knew Andy's house was the last property on the beach, fringed by a lofty wood grove on one side. It wasn't unpleasant walking on the beach at this ungodly hour of the morning, even though it was so dark, as we both had high-powered torches with us, guiding the way, and of course the moonlight helped, spilling its gentle prisms of light over the ripples of water. It was vigorous exercise indeed, and I could feel I was becoming fast out of breath as I stepped up my pace. We could hear the ocean waves crashing against the soft golden sand. It was when we got to the end of the beach I noticed that there were rock pools everywhere, along with high sculptural rocks that thrust their rugged contours through the surf. I could also see the beautiful white house opposite, overlooking these magnificent views, and I knew this must be where Andy Glover now lived. How the hell did he get that kind of money to live in a house that boasted such spectacular oceanfront views? Even at this time of night, I could appreciate how beautiful it was to probably live here. I was sure some of those rock pools were filled with a feast of abundant life. I could see the wood grove that fringed Andy's property. On the furthest side, boasted rugged paths that led to other beaches, so I imagined some of those hikes must have been spectacular. Patsy and I sat on the soft beach sand together. I could smell the brine in the atmosphere. It was cold at this time of the morning, so we both shivered a little. We watched plenty of large crabs running across the beach, and they were quite comical to watch. We talked as we waited for the morning to make its appearance known. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked Patsy, giving her a gentle squeeze. "I'm not going to judge you if you change your mind. You're entitled to do that if you want to. None of this matters, as long as you're happy." "Are you kidding me?" said Patsy resolutely. "I'm here now, aren't I? And I want Andy to tell me himself why he did what he did to me. I'm not going to get cold feet now. Yes, I'm nervous about confronting him, of course I am. But I need answers, Seb. Don't you get that? And that's more important." "Of course I get that, Patsy. Why do you think I came here with you?" "I'm so glad you did, Seb. You have absolutely no idea what this means to me, you're accompanying me like this. I'm not sure I'd have had the balls or the confidence to hang out on this dark beach on my own. I'm sure it's perfectly safe, but I've always been so intimidated by the dark." I'm not sure how long we sat on the beach, staring out absent-mindedly at the ocean, but suddenly it was as if the cloak of darkness that surrounded us seemed to lift, like the dark tenebrific curtain across the stage at a theatre opening to embrace a brand new scene. Of course the sky was still steeped in darkness. A soft golden light appeared across the horizon, unabashedly splashing some orange streaks of colour across the sky, rather like an artist throwing a scattering of tangerine paint across his canvas. That was when I nudged Patsy, for we saw an ambiguous obscure figure descending the wrought iron staircase of the Glover property. And then the figure was on the beach, running down the long ribbon of sand, past the many houses, towards the promenade, I suspected, along with all the vintage shops there. "It's Andy," said Patsy excitedly. "Oh my God, it's him! I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to run further up the beach and catch up with him. Andy's always been a slow jogger. I can run fast. You stay here, Seb. Why don't you go and look at the rock pools over there while you wait for me? I will call out for you if I need you. I promise." "Are you sure you're going to be all right, Patsy?" "I'm going to be absolutely fine. Don't worry, Seb." I don't mean to be rude, but I really need to do this on my own.
Of course. I completely understand.
I could tell that while Patsy was glad I'd come with her, she wanted to meet up with Andy on her own terms, and I couldn't blame her for that. I watched Patsy run down the ribbon of beach sand until I could see her no longer. I decided that yes, while I waited, I would keep myself busy and go exploring the rock pools. I'd always loved looking out for unusual sea life. Little did I know that I was going to have an adventure all of my own that would prove to be the most extraordinary, outlandish thing that has ever happened to me, which makes the story take a rather unexpected turn that I never would have anticipated in my wildest dreams. The sun that morning, like some of us, when we battled to get out of our beds, was struggling to rise, so the sky looked distinctly overcast, like late afternoon when it suddenly looks as if it's going to rain and things get significantly darker. But I'm glad to say the tangerine light still spread its ribbons across the coastline. I trudged over to the rocks, ensuring I didn't slip, for some of those rocks are covered in a soapy foam of ocean spray, and I know from personal experience all too well that it's very easy to slip on those rocks, so you need to be very careful. That was when I heard the strange squealing sound of what seemed to me to be a kid that was in trouble. But then what was a child doing hanging around the rocks at this strange time of the morning? Because it was very, very early. Maybe one of the children who lived in one of the opulent houses that overlooked the beachfront had clandestinely sneaked out of his family home in the early hours of the morning without his parents' permission, as that would be something I would likely do as a child, certainly if I lived in a beautiful house that overlooked the beach like this. I didn't know what to think, but instinctively I dashed over the rocks, moving hurriedly towards what appeared to be a small, obscure, dark figure that was lying flat, stomach down, lying across the rocks, face staring into the rock pool's water. At first I thought it was a child dressed in a black woolly outfit that was trying to pull his hand out of a rock and being unable to do so, as his hand was obviously trapped between the crevices. That happened to me before several times when I was a kid, and let me tell you, it's hell of a scary, especially when you think your hand might have to be chopped off in order for you to be released from the rocks, from that awful, insidious trap. "Let me help you," I cried out, dropping to my knees to assist the child. That was when I found myself looking into the child's frightened face. I wasn't looking at a regular child. I could hardly believe it. It was a Bigfoot youngling. I was so taken aback, so astonished by this unusual encounter. I had come to this child's help, only to discover the child in question was a Bigfoot youngling. The little Bigfoot looked afraid of me. All I wanted to do was comfort him, but I think my presence had startled him somewhat. The Bigfoot was rather surprised to see me, and didn't know quite how to react to me. My presence made him unduly nervous, almost as if he wondered whether I might impose a threat to him. I think he was more afraid of me than I was of him. All I wanted to do was to help him. "It's all right," I said in a calm voice, as the Bigfoot youngling tried to tug his hand out of the rock extra hard with a forceful pull, and then he winced and cried out in pain. I knew it would be no use. He needed my help. I put my hand on his to reassure him, show him I meant him no harm, and then in a gentle, reassuring voice I said, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm a friend." And when I said that, the little Bigfoot immediately relaxed, almost as if he understood my very words. "Let's see what's going on here, shall we?" I said, looking into the rock crevices to examine his hand, caught between the rocks. I attempted to move his hand in different directions to see if I could pull it away from the rocks. However, he'd got his hand badly caught up in a tiny space, and God only knows how. Finally, after several futile attempts of pulling the Bigfoot's youngling's hands out of the rock, I hit pay dirt. I don't even know how I did it, but I managed to pull out his hand from the rocks, and when he realized his hand was free, the little Bigfoot was squealing with delight, staring at his hand in awe, as if he could hardly believe it was still part of his anatomy. The little Bigfoot smiled at me, and I'm not joking when I say that. He genuinely smiled, in the same way that a human child would, and I could sense his gratitude and profound relief. The next thing I know was that a huge, ambiguous figure ran towards me, and I knew at once that it was one of the little Bigfoot's parents. I thought it might be the mother, and it turns out I wasn't wrong. I think she must have heard her youngling's squeals and come to his immediate rescue. When the female Bigfoot saw me with her youngling, she probably thought I was hurting her boy. The next thing I know is that a powerful pair of hands held down on me so hard that I was caught up in her vice-like grip, from where there was definitely no escape. I realized to my horror it was an enormously powerful female Bigfoot, who was so gargantuan in size, I felt like putty in her hands, so desperately small. This was not going to end well for me, I thought. How had I got myself entangled in this awkward mess? I felt like a fly caught up in a spider's web, knowing that I was pretty much doomed. The female Bigfoot had not realized I'd been helping her little boy. I could see her outraged anger and indignance. It was clear to see in her eyes as she glared at me, and in that moment I cannot describe the fear I felt. My heart began to boom violently in my chest, and had I been a hedgehog, I'd have curled up into a tight ball, for nothing prepared me for what was happening next. I felt as if I'd been plunged into a terrible nightmare, of which there was no escape.
"This isn't happening," I told myself. "For God's sake, wake up! This is a dream."
But even as I told myself this, I knew it wasn't. The female Bigfoot threw me over her shoulders, and I dangled over her ponderous shoulders like a pathetic, ungainly sack of potatoes. I was shocked by what was happening to me, so shocked that I couldn't scream. It was as if my tongue was tied. My throat had become dry and scratchy, and nothing came out of my mouth. I didn't call out, but I do remember thinking, this is it. I'm about to meet my Maker. And in that moment, I reached a level of peace, because I think I knew that there was no hope, just like you would in an accident when a lorry is heading straight towards you, and in your heart you know how it's all going to end. And then in seconds you're resigned to your fate, as you know you're not going to get away from the scenario alive. So you haven't got time to indulge in acceptances. You have to make peace with that moment, for you have no other choice. This female Bigfoot was massive. You have no idea how large she was, and it's hard to put down in words. I would say she was at least 8 foot to 9 foot tall. She smelt briny, like the ocean spray, and some beach sand was caught up in her long dark hair, like it does on your feet when they're slightly damp when you've been on the beach for a while. There was no doubt this female Bigfoot was built like a giant gladiator. Her majestic proportions would have intimidated the beefiest of men. What was happening to me felt so surreal, as if I was watching myself from an abstract viewpoint, almost as if I was watching a character in a movie, and feeling indifferent about what was going to happen to the character next, although invariably expecting the outcome of this untimely event to end rather tragically. That was when I heard the little Bigfoot youngling's voice. He was calling up to his mother. He was chatting away urgently to her. He sounded childish, but he was speaking in a very interesting language, and appeared to be reasoning with his mother. "Kitika, hilatepata, hopotokota, golapatikakwati." I could feel the female Bigfoot's grip very suddenly loosen on me. Then she lowered me to the ground as if I was a fragile porcelain doll that she was terrified of breaking. The next thing I knew was her apologetic dark eyes were fixed on me. The anger had immediately dissipated and was replaced by a warm tenderness and a gratitude that I could tangibly feel. I realized that this female Bigfoot meant me no harm, and the relief I felt about this was palpable. Maybe I would live to see another day after all. What happened next was a magnificent experience for me. It was an unlikely exchange between us, where words popped into my head like a beautiful song in a smooth rhythm. And I did not doubt the voice I was hearing inside my head was coming from the female Bigfoot herself. She was communicating with me telepathically. I could hear everything in my head. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought you were harming my little boy.
But he has told me that you didn't hurt him. You were helping him. His hand was stuck between the cracks in a rock, and you removed it for him. He's always putting his hand in strange places. I'm sorry for misjudging you." I stood there staring at the female Bigfoot, thinking to myself that I couldn't believe this was happening. I was having a conversation with a creature that days before I would have argued with you only existed in fairy tales or in wild, fantastical reports where people claim to have sightings of these things, rather like the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland.
"It's fine, you don't need to apologise," I assured the female Bigfoot. "I want you to know I meant your child no harm. I only wanted to help him."
"I can see that," the female Bigfoot replied. "I'm so thankful you came to his assistance." I watched the female Bigfoot put her 4-foot child onto her shoulders. The little Bigfoot youngling nodded at me with warm, treacle-coloured dark eyes that showed me that he had decided I wasn't too bad after all. I stood there for a moment, my eyes locked on the woodgrove, wondering if anyone would ever believe my story if I were to tell them. So I knew that this was a secret I would not share with any, apart from my partner Paul and Patsy, of course, as I knew that these were two people who would know that I would never make stuff like this up. Patsy. I ran eagerly up the beach along the ribbon of sand as I wanted to catch up with Andy. I've always been fast on my feet, and I knew that I could get close enough to call him, and then I'd get his attention. I could taste the salty sea air on my tongue. A cool breeze whipped against my face, while I could hear the crashing sound of the waves thundering towards the seashore. "Andy! Andy!" I called out. The ambiguous figure stopped, looking over his shoulders at me. The light was pretty dim, because although I could see clearly, it was still so greyish. Andy didn't move for a second. I think he was bewildered by the person calling his name, who at that point he failed to realise was me. I ran eagerly towards him and stopped short, where I was standing 2 feet away from him. I could see the horror in Andy's face when he realised it was me. For a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights, as it was poignantly clear I was the last person he had anticipated to see on the beach at this early hour of the morning. "Hello, Andy. Long time no see," I said.
"Patsy, what the hell are you doing here?"
"I might ask you the same question, Andy. What the hell did you think you were doing, running off on our wedding day and disappearing like that? Do you realise for a second how humiliated I was? If you didn't want to be with me, why didn't you tell me before our wedding day, instead of leaving me at the altar like you did? I thought you loved me. I thought we loved each other. But our relationship clearly meant absolutely nothing to you. Because you know what? You're a psychopath. I know exactly why you dumped me, and it's disgusting, absolutely disgusting. You should be ashamed of yourself. It's a pity you couldn't man up to me. But no, that's too much to ask of you, isn't it?"
"You mean he told you?"
said Andy, looking as if he'd been hit over the head with a baseball bat.
"He told me to get the hell away from you and to never talk about this again. It was nothing personal, Patsy. But I took the opportunity of pursuing my dreams, and I wasn't going to miss out on that, was I? I mean, I have my house on the Oregon coast now, and a workshop that I've always wanted. Things have been extremely good for me. I was hardly going to look a gift horse in the mouth, was I?"
"You make me sick, you know that, Andy? I know all about what you did. You married Catherine Carter, the girl you happened to date in junior and senior high. Not just because her parents were rich, I assume, but so that you could get the life you always wanted for yourself. And of course she was pregnant with your child, so it was all terribly convenient, wasn't it? Don't look so surprised. I know exactly how you cheated on me during our engagement together. I know all about it. I think I figured out exactly what happened, Andy. Catherine Carter sent you a text moments before we were about to be married, telling you she was pregnant with your child. Suddenly your conscience was seared and convicted, so you decided to step up to the plate to be a father, didn't you? And left me standing at the altar wondering what the hell was going on. We were engaged, Andy. Did that mean nothing to you? You thought it was all right to cheat on me during our relationship with a girl I knew nothing about, for you never mentioned her once to me. I understand Catherine Carter was your girlfriend in junior and senior high, and now you're conveniently married to her. You make me sick. Go on, admit it. At least have the dignity to tell me why you left our wedding service. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth myself.
How the hell do you know about Catherine? And about our daughter? How could you know about all these things? My mother hasn't been talking to you, has she? She told me she wouldn't tell you anything. How did you find out where I live? I don't understand.
This hasn't got anything to do with your mother. She hasn't told me anything. You really think I could carry on with my life to you, with these gaping wounds that refuse to close? I knew I couldn't move on until I got answers. So what did I do? I did the most obvious thing. I hired a private detective, didn't I? And he told me all I needed to know, including where to find you. And surprise, surprise, it took him only 2 days to smoke you out of your rabbit hole. And now here you are, looking as if butter wouldn't melt in your mouth. You're disgusting, Andy. I don't know what I ever saw in you.
Well, your private detective doesn't know everything. Yes, it's true about Catherine Carter. She was pregnant with my child. I had a one-time fling with Catherine when you and I were engaged, and I do regret it. I introduced you to her, if you remember, when she saw us at the cinema. And I told you we'd been at junior and senior high together. Anyway, 2 days after that, I bumped into her in town. It was evening at that time, and she invited me back to her parents' house. They were both away. The two of us got a little frisky, you see, after a lot of drinking, and I regretted it. She said she wanted to be with me one more time before I married you. I didn't tell you about any of this. I didn't want to lose you. I was mortified with myself for what I had done. I did really want to marry you, Patsy, and I loved you, and I still do. I knew I shouldn't have had a fling with Catherine, but as I say, I got drunk, and I guess things got a little heated between us.
It's so typical of you, Andy, to make excuses for yourself that are unacceptable. You were in a relationship with me at the time. Then you ran into your ex, who I knew nothing about, incidentally. And then you make her pregnant. Oh, I don't even know what to say. You revolt me, Andy. So if you knew Catherine was pregnant with your child, and you were still intending to marry me without even telling me any of this, why did you run away from me during the ceremony? I don't understand that. Did you suddenly have an attack of conscience about your unborn child? Is that it?
I think you should talk to your father about that.
What the hell do you mean, Andy? What has my dad got to do with any of this?
If you want to know, your father offered me a big amount of money not to marry you.
What the hell are you talking about, Andy? My father wouldn't do that.
Oh, yes, he would, said Andy. A couple of days before our wedding, your father arranged to meet up with me in town. He said he had a proposal for me. He offered me $500,000 to leave you the hell alone and to call off the wedding. I told him I'd only agree to his deal if he gave me $1 million. He said he didn't have $1 million at his disposal, so I told him the deal was off.
Are you telling me, Andy, that you were willing to give up on our relationship over money? That's so typical of you. I might have guessed.
I needed the money, Patsy. Don't judge me too harshly. I knew that if I didn't marry you, I could always marry Catherine. So it wasn't a big deal, really. Catherine always has loved me. And we were having a child together anyway. So I had more to gain than lose, didn't I? I couldn't believe it because I was about to declare my vows to you during the church ceremony, when I got a text from your dad in the church. It said, "I've got the $1 million for you. Meet me outside the church." I'm sure you must have noticed your father left the church for a moment. He transferred the money to my account and told me he never wanted to see me again. That's what happened. Just so you know, you got it wrong about Catherine. Her parents were not wealthy. But as it happens, fortune struck me, because 2 years ago her aunt died in a car crash and left all her money to Catherine. She was very well off financially, so we've done very well for ourselves, he said, pointing towards his beachfront home. I'm living the life of my dreams. I'm sorry I dumped you at the church, but it wasn't personal.
You're a moron. You know that, Andy. I should have seen through you like my father and like Seb did. They both thought you were rotten to the core, and turns out they were absolutely right. The only thing you're in love with is your deep pockets. I feel sorry for that wife of yours. She must be a mug to love you. You make me sick to my stomach."
"It's your father who paid me off not to marry you. It's his fault, not mine."
"This has got nothing to do with my father. The fact that you could be bought by him speaks volumes. He paid you a ton of money to get away from me. Money he probably doesn't have and couldn't afford. That's how much he despised you. And now I can see why he did. I've got all the closure I need now, Andy. Goodbye and have a nice life."
"There's no need to be like that, Patsy. I told you I'm sorry."
At that, tears rolled down my cheeks that I didn't want Andy to see. I walked away from him, turning around briefly to see him continue with his run, almost as if he wasn't bothered at all about his confrontation with me, or what he'd actually done to me. He was such a narcissist. I could see that now. I pulled out my cell phone to call my father. It was still extremely early in the morning, but I didn't care. So my poor father was rather startled to hear from me at this ungodly time.
"Is everything all right, Patsy?"
came his panicked voice. "Dad, I've just seen Andy Glover. I know exactly what you did."
"Good Lord, Patsy. I don't know what to say. What did he tell you?"
"He told me, Dad, that you gave him $1 million not to marry me. Is this true, Dad?"
"I'm sorry, Patsy. I know I shouldn't have bribed him like that, but I really didn't like him. I thought he'd break your heart. Can you forgive me?"
"Of course I forgive you, Dad. But I don't know whether to be mad at you or indebted with you. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. But now you're out of pocket because of me."
"Well, I was going to take out a loan for myself and persuade your fiancé not to marry you, because some things are worth investing in. But I'm very lucky because I had a stroke of luck on my side. I was telling one of my wealthy clients at the bank about how my daughter was about to marry a complete douchebag who wanted $1 million to walk away from you. This client was very sympathetic. He'd had similar problems with his own daughter, getting involved with someone really seedy. So he gifted me the money. He said it was a pleasure to help me out. There are some very good people in this world, Patsy, that do something good without expecting anything in return. And for this client of mine, $1 million was water off a duck's back to him. I'm sorry that I did this behind your back, Patsy. I know it was wrong. Your mother knows nothing about this, and if she did, she'd be appalled by what she would consider interfering in your life. But I just couldn't sit back and watch you make the biggest mistake of your life. I didn't trust Andy as far as you could throw him, and I knew he'd end up breaking your heart. And I had to stop that from happening."
"Dad, you shouldn't have interfered like you did. But the truth is, if Andy had refused your money, it would have shown you that he genuinely loved me. But the fact that he could be easily bribed by money speaks volumes about his character. So I did have a lucky escape. I also discovered he made his ex-girlfriend pregnant while we were engaged. So he cheated on me, and he's married to her now. Can you believe that?"
"Good Lord, it's worse than I could have imagined," said my father. "Andy Glover has no shame, does he? I knew he was a complete wanker. This is a new word I've added to my vocabulary. I learnt about it 2 days ago on the internet. It's an English expression for a complete douchebag or loser."
When I'd finished my phone call with my father, I saw the figure of Seb rushing towards me. His face was flushed, and he looked extremely excited. I knew at once that something big had happened, but I couldn't figure out what it could be. "What's going on, Seb?" I asked. Seb began to speak hurriedly, and then he told me all about his Bigfoot encounter. At first I wasn't sure how to react to any of this, but on a wet piece of beach sand I saw an enormous footprint that was so large it could not have been human, and then I knew what Seb was telling me had to be true.
"Sorry, Patsy. I've been so excited to tell you about my Bigfoot encounter. I forgot to ask how things went with Andy."
"Well, it went well enough, I suppose, as well as can be expected. I did get the answers I was looking for. It turns out he didn't abandon me at the altar on our wedding day because he realised he was going to be a father to Catherine's baby. No, he knew Catherine was pregnant already with his baby, but he was still going to marry me and not tell me his dirty secret."
"You're joking," said Seb. If that's the case, why did he abandon you then?
My father gave him $1 million not to marry me, and he chose the money over me. Seb put his arm around me and said,
How does that make you feel, Patsy? You're not angry with your dad, are you? I do understand why he did what he did.
Maybe I should be angry with him, because he interfered in my life, but he did it because he loathed Andy, and with good reason it would seem. I now know how fortunate I was not to marry the man. He really was a douchebag in every regard. But it's his wife I feel desperately sorry for. She's lumbered with him for the rest of her life. She's lumbered with a man who will never really love her, because he's in love with his bank account. And she can't compete with a mistress like that, can she?
So you do have the closure you're looking for now?
Seb asked me, with hope in his eyes. I sure do, I said. Seb and I walked away from the beach together, with mixed emotions. Seb was so excited about his Bigfoot encounter, and I was humbled by how much my father had stuck his neck out for me to stop me from marrying Andy. But I guess we both walked away from that beach, changed forever. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.